Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the latest Urban Living webinar. And today we are going to talk about what is probably the hottest sector in the whole of living at the moment, co-living. Everybody's talking about it, but there are some problems to address, and one of them is around the image and perception, and that's what we're going to get stuck into today. Today's session is supported by the ARL and Co-Living Ventures, so thanks to them for their support. My name's George Sell. I'm the editor of Urban Living News, and we are an online multimedia platform for the living and hospitality sectors. Today's webinar is going to last an hour. We're going to have around about 45 minutes of discussion with our panelists. We'd like to make it as interactive as we can, so if you have any questions, you can submit them using the chat or the Q&A function in Zoom. And a link to a recording of the session will be sent to everyone who's registered via email over the next few days. I just wanted to show some context slides before we meet our panelists, just to give you an idea of some of the headlines that are out there talking around co-living. There is definitely an element of misunderstanding amongst the media, amongst the general public, certainly amongst planners, which we'll go on to talk about. But you can see some of the language that's being used is not particularly helpful. Dystopian is one that's popped up a few times. There's a lot of focus on unit size, which we'll also talk about. And then if we go on to the next slide, just to kind of counterbalance that, there's some really interesting stuff happening. There's some really good projects coming through. Yeah, and this is kind of indicative of a sector that's maturing. Some innovative stuff going on here, like energy positive schemes. The Narrow House there in Birmingham, bottom left. The scheme in Hackney Wick, which is working really closely with the local community and is backed by them. So there's good stuff happening, and I think we need to get the word out there a bit better collectively as a sector to educate all the stakeholders involved in the process, and that's something that we can talk a bit about today. So we have got a fantastic group of panelists here, a real depth of knowledge around co-living. Going to ask them to introduce themselves in turn as we see them on the slide there. So first of all, Jermaine, good morning to you.
Good morning. My name's Jermaine Browne. I'm the co-founder of Reshape Living, who specialise in alternative living models across co-living in PBSA. And we also created the ARC platform, which is now in operation over 2 assets in Wembley and Canary Wharf, at over 1,000 beds.
Thanks, Jermaine. And next, Brent, welcome to you.
Thanks, George. So I'm Brent Stojanovic, and I'm the Managing Director of Lomond Investment Management. We're a third-party operator of co-living, single-family rentals, and built-to-rent assets.
Thank you, Brent. Oliver, good morning to you.
Hi, morning all. Oliver Heywood, partner in the operational living cap markets team at Bidwells, with a background in co-living and built-to-rent and hotels and service apartments. And we focus on the transactional side of helping the developers get these schemes out the ground from funding structures, and making sure the schemes are as efficient as possible.
Thanks, Oliver. And finally, Penny, welcome to you.
Morning. So I'm Penny Clark. I'm a co-founder and one of the directors of Conscious Co-Living, and we conduct research and offer consultancy to the co-living sector, specialising in community experience and social and environmental impact.
Excellent. Thanks, Penny. If you look in the chat, you should be able to see the LinkedIn profiles for our speakers. So if you'd like to carry on the conversation with them after the webinar, then do connect with them on there. So, okay, let's start. The session is called Co-Living's Image Problem and how to overcome it. And this kind of stems, I think, from a basic misunderstanding of what co-living can offer now and who it's actually targeted at. So what are the main hurdles that we're facing? What are the main misconceptions that people hold, particularly planners, about co-living, and how can we work together as a sector to collaborate to clarify exactly what we're trying to do? Jermaine, do you want to kick off with that one?
Yeah, definitely. I think it stems back from the way we historically was approaching co-living right at the beginning, its initial inception at the collective. And it's just about taking people on the journey of what co-living is and how they can benefit from it. I think one of the key things for the way we view co-living is that as a housing typology, it's very different to your traditional build for sale, where typically the only people that will be allowed in that building are residents who either lease or buy a property. And where you have co-living, because it's a rental product, you can have a lot more flexibility of who comes through the door. And then also, rather than just create a community within the building, you can then take the existing community which you're developing with on that journey. And I think it's just holding that as a central principle before you start the journey on what your co-living product's going to look like and how it's going to operate and how you present it to both investors and the market.
And from your experience, Jermaine, is the kind of level of understanding around the concept improving? I mean, I believe you're an ex-planner yourself. So, how would you gauge the kind of the current level, and how much does it vary around various cities, boroughs, and even countries?
I would say we're at a point where now most local planning authorities in metropolitan areas, in particular, have a good understanding of what co-living is, and are broadly supportive of it as well. I think the London GLA guidance has really helped solidify what co-living should be as an institutional product. We've got a number of projects outside of London, and that guidance is often referenced. And I think it's helped bridge that previous issue around trust of what this is going to look like, who's going to live there, and how it's going to be operated. And I would say most councils are now probably in favour of it, depending on how you present it.
Yeah, thanks, Jermaine. Penny, what's your take on the kind of main misconceptions, and how are you seeing the level of understanding of the product improving?
So yeah, I do agree with Jermaine. I think in general, local authorities have come a long way, and there is increased understanding. Having said that, I think speaking with a few peers, I'm still hearing the same kind of objections coming up again. So number one, is this just student housing and HMOs by the back door? Concerns around transients, concerns around the room sizes, with the amenities based in the building, concerns around neighbourhood integration. I did have a conversation with some GLA planners a few weeks back, and actually one worry they had was they came in, they took a site tour, they really actually liked the co-living scheme, but their worry was, okay, how do we as planners know that the same quality of management will continue over the years, and that this management company won't leave, and another one managing to a lower quality won't come in. So there's lots of standard worries that I do think crop up over and over again. But I also think all of these worries have really good, really strong answers. And there's a lot of positives about co-living, and it's just about kind of promoting that narrative a bit more as a sector.
Thanks, Penny. Do you think that the problems that we're facing in the UK are similar to those in Europe and the rest of the world in terms of getting the model understood? Where are we on the curve with other countries?
Yeah, interesting question. I don't think I can give you a really good answer to that, because I don't think I really know. But I will say London, I do think is one of the leading cities in the world when it comes to co-living. And I guess there's a few different factors at play. That there's also kind of cultural factors around what is your idea of home, and how used are you as a society to kind of having a slightly more communal way of living. So yes, I think a few different factors around there, but actually I think, yeah, on balance, I think the UK is not doing too badly compared to some other countries, but yeah, hard to generalize when you're talking about the world.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Penny. Jermaine, you mentioned that the GLA guidance has had a positive effect, and is that the blueprint that other cities are generally using?
Yeah, most definitely, most definitely. And I think the interesting thing is that obviously I come from the perspective where I was securing planning permissions for co-living probably about 8 years ago, where there was no guidance, and there was little to no product to show, and even that product was inferior. So I think the guidance is really now a great tool, and it's actually a tool that we also promote across the industry to councils as well. We set up a consortium group, for example, which provided a 400-page evidence base to the GLA, and I'd say about 90% of what we asked was adopted, which was a pleasant surprise. So I think my advice is that I would always use that guidance by the GLA, because it can be the difference in making a scheme efficient and not, which is paramount to obviously deliverability and viability.
Yeah, thanks, Jermaine. I think one of co-living's strengths is that being a relatively new tenure, a new type of accommodation, it does address a really important niche in the shortage of housing, you know, that kind of period between graduation and potentially home ownership or build to rent. Brent, what's your take on the role of co-living in addressing the housing crisis, and how do we position it as a viable long-term solution rather than just a temporary fix?
Yeah, so I think broadly on this, George, we're still so early in the day when it comes to co-living in the UK, right? And I think that's really, really important to understand. You know, what's the current juncture and where have we been and where we're going. So it depends whose study you read. You know, in approximation, there are 9,000 operationally live co-living units across the UK, against the backdrop of what could be an addressable market of 750,000 potential members. So it's tiny. The headroom for growth is massive. I actually think one of the most interesting, and Jermaine and Penny both touched on the planning. I actually think one of the most interesting dimensions of this debate is, clearly that there's no specific planning use class for co-living. Will we ever get one? Well, I don't know, maybe not. But then you get into the realm of C1 co-living, so hotel style co-living versus co-living without categorization. Sui generis, and Jermaine, knows this patch very, very well, given his background and tenure at the collective and what he's doing at Reshape. But C1 co-living adds a degree of complexity clearly to operations, to investment. It does simplify the affordable housing aspect of bringing forward a scheme. But in essence, with a C1 co-living building, you're running part of that building as a short stay hotel, which adds operational challenge and complexity, not unsurmountable. And certainly there are a number of really, really strongly performing C1 co-living assets in the market. So I don't think anything to be scared of. I think there's probably more liquidity in the market at exit, certainly at the moment, and maybe going forward. I don't think this is a controversial statement for sui generis co-living. But I think there's still work to do on the planning canvas and the planning landscape when it comes to co-living. And back to my previous point, we're still so early in the day. I think as we move forward, as more of these high quality schemes get built, the occupational market, in my experience, is really, really deep for co-living in London and in one or two, maybe three key regional cities. So I think all these concerns, as ever, as the sector drives forward, will inevitably be addressed.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. Jermaine, did you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, just to add to Brent's points as well, I always like to say that co-living isn't a planning use class, it's a way of branding an experience in a building. So ultimately, you can have someone who's got a 7-bedroom HMO, they could brand it co-living. You could have someone who's got a service apartment, they brand it as co-living. Even a hostel can be branded as co-living. And then you've even got the later living, which is now branding themselves as co-living. I think where the main difference is going to be seen is that you will start seeing sui generis co-living in its own space. And that's going to be referenced by calling it shared living. And that's going to then become the institutional grade product, which then has similarities to affordable build to rent, because it's often built on an AST model and it's got a very, very similar structure. And that's probably where you'll see it. Everything will be called co-living as and when people want it, but shared living will be the institutional product of choice for investors in the UK over time.
Yeah. Does that mean, Jermaine, that the sui generis is likely to become the prevalent form of planning consent that people are looking for with new comments? Or I mean, the C1 obviously has the advantages of high ADRs on the short stay units, but as Brent's alluded to, it's complicated to run.
Yeah, most definitely agree with that. And look, we acquired a hotel to create a C1 co-living. The truth of that is one of the main drivers of that was to deliver a proof of concept for what second generation co-living could look like. But we always knew that we want to dial up short stay and long stay. So I think there's a place for C1 co-living, but not to be blunt about it, you could just call it a service apartment as well, in truth. So I think that's where you'll see what real co-living shared living is, and then the rest are just branded as co-living in truth.
Oliver, what's your take on this, and what do you think the investors who are considering getting involved?
Yeah, no, sure. So I think in terms of where we are today in the space is we've got if you look at the operational schemes in the market, which have commanded the sharpest yield on valuation because we haven't seen the new generation of co-living. So, for example, the Folk kit, the sui generis use class there, we haven't seen them trade. So, in terms of the schemes coming through consented at the moment, some in the city, for example, they are a sui generis use class. And that is because, going back to Jermaine's point, I completely agree. The institutional investment, which came, if you look at the operational real estate market as a whole, 15 years ago, people were trying to classify service departments and why it wasn't sitting in the C1 category. And it sat in sui generis. And what's happened since is these schemes have been built, they've delivered, they've traded incredibly well, and the institutional capital has got comfortable with the overall performance of the asset and have come in and invested into the space. And that then has underpinned the tenants in place and created covenant strengths, and therefore the operators have grown their portfolios through the nature of more investment coming into the space. With the C1 use unrestricted stay, there is the ability, as mentioned here, to have that short stay, long stay. So you're maximizing your income. It does come with the complexities of having a very much a hospitality focused operation. But to be fair, with all these schemes, you have got multiple different types of amenity facilities. So therefore, as long as you can keep control of your OPEX costs in a way which is aligned to how a hotel operation does trade, then actually you're going to find that these tenants are going to want to stay for longer periods of time than rather than just a short stay for a couple of days.
Yeah. Oliver, are you seeing any change in the kind of investor profile that's looking at coming into co-living? Is it a range of investors who are comfortable with the concept?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I was involved in 3 of the forward funding structures in the sui generis space in the last 3-4 years, and that went through a marketing processes where we saw a lot of the build to rent investors intrigued, came forward. Some who looked at the space and thought, just not yet, not quite ready, want to see more of the schemes delivered and trading actually stabilizing of these schemes. But due to everything that we've seen on a macroeconomic position over the last 12 to 18 months, you're seeing the typical build-to-rent investor who can't get build-to-rent stack up because you've got land has been at a certain level, land values have come off. You've seen the build costs go up 20, 30% at times, and we've seen the yields should have moved out probably further than they have. Co-living obviously provides you with the fact that we've got density of units within a scheme. You've got high quality new rental product. And I think the key thing is we're seeing a lot of variance in the schemes coming through consents. So we're seeing new build, but we're also seeing the repurposing of offices, which is then increasing city living. And, that is where, going back to your question, we're seeing this as high quality apartments in prime central locations as a long-term solution for fixing, hopefully, a part of the housing crisis.
Yeah, thanks, Oliver. Brent, one of the which is giving build-to-rent developers a big headache is the Renters' Rights Bill. How is that likely to affect operating co-living buildings?
Yeah, so I think obviously it would depend on whether there's a license to occupy or an AST in place, George. I mean, in my experience of working with licenses, an LTO, what I would say to anyone dialing in is if it looks like an AST, it smells like an AST, and it walks and talks like one, then it doesn't really matter what you call it. It probably is one, and your members or your residents have probably the rights of a tenant. So I think where co-living schemes are contracting with residents and members on an AST, all of the same, all of the same challenges and opportunities will apply to the co-living market as currently is being chatted about and talked about, and there's a lot of discourse around this in build to rent at the moment. So obviously being able to change to periodic leases. There's some nice fluffy stuff in there, excuse the pun, around pets. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there around pricing, not being able to accept rent, income in excess of what's being advertised. Well, I think the market will very quickly work its way around that. You just set the price higher, probably. So I think again, co-living operators and developers naturally should be really switched on to what's going on with the Renters' Rights Bill.
Yeah, thank you, Brent. Penny, we've seen examples of where perception of co-living has kind of gone wrong right from the start. In Ireland, for example, where a couple of the early projects led to a complete moratorium on new planning consents. How do we kind of overcome NIMBYism and build positive relationships with local communities, local politicians, and kind of explain the positives of co-living, the benefits of it, especially against the background of maybe some early projects which weren't the best?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I do think co-living for a type of residential building, it does have a fairly unique strength in that inherent in the model is this ability to really give something back to local communities. And I know people on this panel have been involved in some really good work in regards to that. So I think, conducting that on the grounds needs assessment can help to bring local communities on side, and also can help you to develop, okay, how are we going to use our resources, our amenity spaces, our staff, what can we do to support those local communities? And then for political leaders, I think a really big part of it is about making what co-living is really tangible. So the classic thing is, if you can bring them on a site tour, bring them to a site, let them see it. There's a lot of light bulb moments, I think, which happens when that happens. And also, I think collectively as a sector, having the data, having collective industry data, having post-occupancy evaluations, which are showing the quality and the positive social and environmental benefits of co-living as a sector is key as well. Because in the end, I think planners, they do want to make decisions based on evidence, and so they need the evidence to support what it is that they do. And then one final thing to mention, I think, is while it is very important to listen to local communities, a group of people whose voices don't get heard are the voices of the people who aren't living there, who in theory would really like to live in these homes and are, have a need for more homes to be built, but don't have the options. So finding ways to give a voice to those people is important as well. And one really good example of that is the Just Build Homes campaign. And I do think overall, with in particular with challenges around affordability, the narrative around houses and house building is changing. Less NIMBY, more YIMBY. In particular, I think this narrative around, I grew up here, I'd like to continue living here. I think that's a key part of the puzzle too. How are we going to enable people to not be priced out of their own areas that they're local to?
Yeah. Jermaine, have you done much in the way of community consultation around the schemes that you've been involved in, and what have been the kind of learnings from that, in terms of perception of what co-living is and what new schemes are all about?
Yeah, we always do quite substantial engagement with local communities, but also businesses, SMEs, charities. Again, using that open door policy, we're not only providing homes, but we could be providing somewhere where they can work for free, or they could have free access to the gym space. So we always do that. I think one of the key things for us is that I think the point about YIMBYism is definitely increasing, but I also think that younger generations are just really disappointed by their housing choices. And I also think older generations also now relate to that because of their children, their nieces, and the nephews. And I'm at a point now where we're having public consultations, and all people are asking is, what's the price point? And as soon as you tell them that price point is 20 to 30% cheaper than adjacent new build to rent stock, or it's £200 per room more expensive than a local HMO, but it comes with all the facilities, you instantly get a lot of support. And I think it's great what we do in co-living, and we've got all these grand ideas about creating communities and giving these connected living experiences. But I think the biggest thing that we do is provide housing when a lot of other housing uses are not coming forward at the moment. And I think that's something that we really do need to focus on, because ultimately we are providing homes, and they are much needed homes. And if it's at the right price point and you're buying well, they'll perform very well, and there's a lot of excitement. And even our scheme in Salford, we had over 60 people aged between 21 and I think about 40 writing support of our proposals in a 2-week period after trying to generate support. So yeah, it's definitely changing the landscape and how people see co-living from a public perspective and community perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that people seem to obsess about, and which I think was responsible for a lot of the early negative publicity, was unit size. And there were some schemes which did have extremely small units. Anecdotally, it seems to me that average unit size is creeping up a bit, but obviously that has to be balanced with a suitable amount of communal space, and obviously investors need to make returns. These projects need to be viable. Brent, can you maybe give us an overview of where we're at in terms of unit size, and how kind of building design and thinking is evolving?
So I think unit sizes are, generally speaking, getting bigger based on the plans that I'm seeing coming through. So I think that's certainly a trend. I think co-living is a very, very strong accommodation choice for single people who are typically probably a bit younger. But I can certainly foresee the appeal of the co-living typology that diversify. We're seeing more double occupancy than ever, I would say, across the UK's operationally live co-living estate. That will, I expect that trend to continue. So I think that's broadly where we're going on unit sizes. On amenity, have we yet reached peak amenity? Again, I don't know. The GLA recently, last year I believe it was, revised their guidance on the ratio of amenity space, indoor and outdoor, to units per unit. So I think that the baseline now is 4 up to the 100th resident, which then steps down. It was at 5. But certainly, I've seen schemes, this side of a new year that have been sent to me with, 8, 9, 10 square meters of indoor amenity per unit. I mean, is that investable? Again, unsure. That scheme's probably a bit too baggy at those levels. So I think it is interesting, but I think unit sizes for sure will continue to get bigger, and probably should.
And where are we at roughly at an average now, Brent? Kind of high 20s?
Yeah, it's a great question. One I get asked all the time. I haven't actually done the maths on it, so I'll caveat what I'm about to say. But I think, you know, if I was advising a client, all things being fair and equal, notwithstanding planning constraints and all the other considerations, I would say, you know, start at about 20 if you can, and give yourself some justification and rationale to move it downwards if you need to, and then step up from there as a broad rule.
Okay, I can see two hands up here. I think Penny, yours was fractionally ahead of Jermaine's.
Thanks. Yeah, this is an interesting one because I think this is a kind of classic worry from planners and from policymakers. So yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, what I've seen repeatedly in the literature is 20 to 25 meters is the current sweet spot. But yeah, what I wanted to say about this was that it is important to factor in people's desire to have this level of privacy, and actually that it's in terms of reasons why people choose co-living, in my experience and from the little bits of research that have been done, the ability to live alone is pretty high on that list of reasons to choose co-living. So it might be people who, yes, they want some support and a social life, but they're just kind of beyond that phase where they want to house share. So co-living is giving them that ability to live alone, and as such, like creating a decent private space is important. But having said that, although yes, we've got to bear in mind the amount of space, like that's only part of the picture. It's also really about good design as well. Spaciousness is 3 times more important than space when it comes to feeling happy in your home, according to the Good Home Report, a really interesting piece of research. And I did recently a small number of qualitative interviews with co-living residents. And one of the things that I asked them about was what they think about their room, how they feel about their room. And the way they spoke about their rooms was really positive, and themes which tended to come up were, you know what, at this point in my life, it's all I need. That was a big theme, like it's all I need. It's my sanctuary. Benefits like actually it's really easy to clean because it's quite small. It's really well designed. And also I have access to all this amenity space, you know, along with having my own private space as well. So yeah, just to throw in this information about how people were talking to me about the size of their rooms.
Yeah, and I think it's very relevant what you said. Good design is so crucial. I mean, a well-designed smaller space is much better to live in than a poorly designed bigger space. Jermaine, did you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, just quickly on that. So the GLA guidance states that a room should be no smaller than 18 square meters and no larger than 30 square meters. At Reshape, we believe that institutional grade co-living will be no less than 21 square meters in the future. And that effectively is an internal space of 3 meters by 7 meters. The reason for that is by going to 3 meters instead of 2.5, you can have activation on both sides of the wall. That activation creates it and makes it feel more homely, while the depth of the 7 meters instead of 6 or 6.5 also allows for a fixed seating solution rather than a chair and a desk. And my nervousness is that the chair and the desk in an 18 square meter room feels more studenty and less like a home. And that's why we think 21 is probably where the base is going to be. I think it would be a shame if it goes up to 24 to 27 or 30. The reason being for that is you've got to appreciate that it's about the price point for the individual. And if you're saying all co-living rooms need to be 30 square meters, then what you've basically said is all rooms are a third bigger or 50% bigger. And then therefore the rental access point is likely to be 50% more as well, which then makes it even more affordable. So I think the room size in relation to the pricing is extremely important, given that we're trying to respond to a housing need and affordability crisis at the moment. And then the final point I would say is it's a bit of secret sauce, but it's about the positioning and framing of co-living. Some people would say, oh, it's a small room. it's half the size or a third of the size of a 1-bedroom flat. I say it's a big room and you're living bigger, because a 21 square meter room is 8 to 10 square meters larger than a HMO bedroom or the bedroom that they have with their parents. So it's really about changing that perception that people actually living bigger if they was confined to just living in a bedroom, either at the parents or in a shared flat.
Yeah, thanks, Jermaine. Oliver, did you want to talk about room size, perhaps from a
Yeah, I can jump in. So just in terms of, as some of the comments made, the GLA guidance has helped dramatically, but we've seen the unit sizes, they have increased in recent years. And actually, when you come out of London and start looking at where we're seeing schemes coming forward in Bristol, in Bath, and in Manchester, etc., some of the key cities which have got strong rental tone, we're seeing much larger units. And actually, it's almost like saying they're calling them co-living, but they're much more akin to being the size of BTR units, which is more driven by the fact, as we go into the regions, they do look at that larger unit size. And not having a co-living policy or other schemes to actually point towards or compare to. When you're looking at the investment metrics against it, actually the difference between when speaking to a lot of operators, when they're looking at actually the performance of these of the schemes and the difference between 18 to 21 square meters, there is going to be that natural impact on build costs up front. But actually, for the long term for investors, and echo Jermaine's point, actually looking at focusing between that 21 up to 25 square meter room is going to mean that, yes, you're going to have that little extra level of rent you'll be charging, but for the long term, the investor's going to see much greater returns.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Oliver. The flip side to room size, communal facilities, and the spaces that people can use to work and to spend leisure time in the building. In build to rent, we've seen this kind of amenity arms race that is often referred to, which has led to, in some cases, over specification and underutilized space. Penny, what's sort of current thinking on what you need to include in a co-living development to get people to form community bonds, to enjoy the space, but without kind of over specifying and leading to underutilized spaces? What's the kind of optimum mix?
Of course, it varies scheme by scheme and what type of resident is in your scheme. But there's certainly some types of amenities that I've seen are more favoured. So co-working, from what I've seen, is often, the busiest communal space that there is and the most well used. Kitchens, a lot of socialising tends to happen there. Not always, haven't seen that in every single scheme, but in quite a few. And I think there's kind of an interesting question mark here about, is there any distinction between how spaces are valued by residents and how often they are used by residents? So, for example, I've spoken to some residents who said, oh, I've only been to the gym twice since I've lived here, but I really like that there is a gym available. Oh, and by the way, gyms are popular as well, just to note. And then there's also a temporality to spaces as well, and a seasonal aspect to spaces. So terraces, quite empty in the winter, naturally, a really important social hub in those lovely long summer evenings. So it's also about how are residents valuing these spaces too. So again, I'm going to quote the Good Home Report for the second time. The most important emotion linked with a happy home is the emotion of pride. So what enables residents to feel proud of where they live? Cinema rooms have been a bit dunked on of late as being a bit less used than some other rooms. But again, when I spoke to residents, that's a feature that popped up quite often as something that, they felt quite good about, that they had in their in as part of their homes. So yeah, I'm kind of, I want to just kick a bit of mud into the water about how we value these spaces. And then I think you also asked about how do we kind of draw people out into these spaces and help them feel comfortable. And I think that there's an enormous human element to doing this. So how, when you think about how is it that you feel when you're sitting at home, you feel really comfortable, you hopefully don't feel self-conscious. So how do you kind of evoke that feeling in spaces where people may be sharing those spaces with people who they may know, may not know, may or may not have met? And I think actually, of course, creating that sense of community is key. But the point I want to pick up on there is the role that the staff can play in doing that. So I've really seen co-living staff kind of make a place feel like home because they are so friendly, they are so good at connecting with people. So as well as the well-designed spaces, that there's a very human element to drawing people out and helping them to feel comfortable as well.
Yeah, thank you, Penny. That's a good point. Jermaine, you've been involved with some of the very earliest co-living schemes, and now you're seeing kind of blueprints for the latest iteration, as it were. What trends are you seeing in terms of amenities and what people value and what gives the optimum mix?
Very similar to the points Penny made. I think first and foremost, co-working is the key anchor because of working from home. I think when you look at COVID, people that spent COVID in a flat compared to someone that spent it in a home with a garden was a very different experience. Hence why now external amenity space is really, really important for residents. And then gymnasium spaces and also wellness as well. But the wellness and the gyms, they also need to be curated as well. So at ARC, we see a very significant difference between how many people will attend a yoga session, which is based on the TV and an app, and then how many people will attend when it's a instructor turn up in person. So I think you've got to put a lot into how you're actually activating spaces, not just what the spaces are. And I also think with the amenities, I think less is more as well. In the sense that you only want a few pockets of spaces, so then you can increase the chances of people bumping into each other, having those moments of connection. I think when we look at Wembley Arc, we're at 4 square meters of amenity space per person that lives in the building. You will probably never have more than 15 to 20 people in one space at any given time, because people live different lives. Some people are at family, some people are at work, some people are in the room, some people might be out with friends. So you never get 300 people or anything near that descending onto one space. And I think it's got to have that appreciation that you really need to give thought about how many square meters you are delivering and then how you're going to deliver that in the best way to create them opportunities for connection.
Yeah, thanks, Jermaine. Brent, in build to rent, events and programming is quite an important part of the community making element. Does that apply to co-living too, or due to the demographic, is it a more of a kind of organic rather than a forced process, do you think?
Yeah, I think it definitely applies and has already been touched on. I think the more organic, and I'm not an anthropologist or a social scientist, but I would suggest that the more organic an operator is with regards to building community, the better for everyone, because it's cheaper for an operator, it's typically lower touch, and it's better for the residents. Generally, people don't like being instructed or told to have organized fun. Right, there's always going to be a place for a pizza party or a drinks event or a speed network. These are all great events which should actually should always play a part in a building's cultural calendar. But actually, what's more important, I would suggest, is what goes on between the edges of those organised events in terms of how you drive community. And I think progressive operators are really starting to get that now. Just to circle back on amenities, I think there are layers to again that discourse, because what amenities let the units versus what amenities extend stays versus what amenities add value to prices, to income, to rents, versus what amenities get used can be, in some cases, very, very different things, and are not often mutually exclusive. So, understanding the amenity composition of a building in light of its positioning, its comp set, the income you want to achieve, the operating costs of the NOI, the approach to on-site staffing, is super important.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. We've got some questions from the audience, so I'll come to those shortly, but I just want to skip on to the last question on our agenda first, and that's where we see the sector heading in the next 5 to 10 years. What do you think will be the biggest trends in co-living, and how can we ensure the sector remains relevant and adaptable to changing demographics and market conditions? Oliver, could I kick off with you for that one first, please?
Yeah, sure. I think the fact that we've seen post-COVID and the people who are staying in what everyone was trying to typify the type of resident in a co-living scheme as young professional / HMO student, and that has changed dramatically. We've seen that because you can see back through customer and tenant surveys on the demographic of what the resident is now, and that has moved on from all walks of life, so different ages who are using it, from not just as for living 7 days a week, but also people from outside of specifically London who are commuting and using as a pied-à-terre for 3-4 days. So the use of a co-living scheme, I think, has changed. In terms of going forwards, like, how do we see that impacting? The fact that we're seeing more of these schemes in central city locations, I think, is only a good thing. We're pending the borough and obviously your co-living policy, there is very much a pushing and a positive messaging from many developers who are looking at delivering schemes within certain boroughs. And with those schemes becoming more operational, we're going to start to see a variety of investors coming in. So it's not just going to be just from the private equity and the fund money, but we should hopefully see some more core institutional money coming into the space. And I think the other bit to mention is we're starting to see a lot of these schemes which are creating a real identity from an operator perspective, where there are operators who are really focusing on them as a brand, which we've seen has translated across from a lot of the hospitality markets as well. So tenants are looking at certain schemes and going, well, actually, that's got many of the things where I want to live, but that whole piece around the brand and marketing, I think, is going to be key for making sure that not only the investors come in and are in there for a long time, but it means that if you are, as a tenant, that actually as an operator and a brand starts to have additional schemes, then you're going to see more people want to spend more time and visit other ones.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you for that. Penny, how about you? How do you see things evolving?
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting time for co-living. I'm really interested to see how co-living in the regions develops. So I think that's kind of over the next year or two, we're seeing a lot more of that. I think we'll see more sort of niches, if you like, co-living niches. The co-living for seniors, that's something that's been talked about for quite a long time. We're seeing examples of that in some countries in Europe as well. So I think there's certainly space for that. I think we'll see more experimentation around scale as well, finding, okay, what's the right scale according to, the relative location that schemes are in, and more experimentation around private and communal space, and whether to use kind of cluster flats or stick with the studios. And I also think co-living, in our current context, we have a Labour government with about 4 years who's pledged to build 1.5 million homes, which is an enormous challenge. And so I think here is a fantastic opportunity for the co-living sector to be part of that strategy. So I think over the next few years, trying to continue to bring co-living to the attention of national government as well as local government too, and point out all of the amazing benefits that can come with co-living schemes is really key. This is something that we're working on at Conscious Co-Living at the moment, with a number of industry partners. We're working on the Why Co-Living campaign. So if you're interested in that kind of collaborative industry effort, please do go and check out the Why Co-Living campaign. But I think that there's enormous potential for this sector over the next few years. I think it's just meeting so many unmet needs when it comes to housing. So yeah, I think the future can be really bright for co-living.
Yeah, thanks, Penny. Before I come to Jermaine and Brent, actually, Penny, you preempted one of our audience questions here, so I'm going to direct this one to you, as you've kind of picked up on it already. Question is from Kate Schiffman, and she's asking about intergenerational co-living schemes, and whether this is something that's under consideration in the market and what the sentiment towards it is.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. So when you look at various communal living models, there tends to be more emphasis on intergenerational schemes, or kind of schemes which are a bit more holistic in terms of the demography that you find living in these types of schemes. With co-living, so the core market is seen as this kind of young professional, right? But I think actually, more anecdotally, there are a sizable chunk of people who are a bit older than what you might think of as sort of typical co-living residents. So to some extent, this is already happening a little bit, because I think co-living caters to people who in one way or another may be in a slight moment of life transition, and that might be starting a new job, or it might be a kind of change in family circumstance. Right, life transitions can happen at any point in your life. So I think co-living can really suit people of multiple generations. And bearing in mind, this is happening probably without any specific advertising at these slightly older age groups. And one more anecdote to throw in there. So a couple of years ago, I visited a site that happened to, as a kind of hangover, have a couple of units that were 3 bedrooms that they didn't especially want, but it wasn't worth changing them into anything else. And there were 2 families there with young children who really loved and appreciated these schemes, because it was a safe environment for the kids. There were events going on a lot of the time. They could take the kids down. Other people would interact with them. The parents could have a break for a moment. So actually, there's a lot about co-living that can suit people at different life stages. So although at the moment it kind of we have this niche audience in mind for co-living, I think there's a lot of room for co-living to be supportive and helpful for people across the life cycle, if you like. Yeah,
great. Thanks, Penny. Jermaine, how about your view of the kind of evolution over the next 5 to 10 years? And does that kind of broadening of the demographic target group form part of that, do you think?
I think so. Look, we've been talking about intergenerational co-living probably for about 8 to 10 years. I think there will be a place for it, and I think it serves a great purpose in society, as shown by a number of studies of the benefits of older people and young people engaging together. I think immediately, it's probably a story of 2 halves. I think on the planning and political, I think you're going to get a real deep ingrained understanding of what co-living is and get across the board support in most locations, similar to the way Build to Rent went on a similar journey probably 10, 15 years ago. I do think, though, there are going to be some negatives that we're going to have to overcome. And the main one I'm most concerned about is the perception of a lack of delivery. I think, unfortunately, we have a situation where a lot of developers or landowners do an underwrite for co-living, and they think that is going to solve their financial problems for the money that they've got on that site. And then they proceed with a planning application, and ultimately it's probably in a location that's not fundable. My gut feeling is I probably think about 50% of co-living consents may never actually get built out, just because you're going to see a real flight to quality as the economic requirements tighten on what is institutional grade and what is institutional product. So that's a big problem we've got to navigate. I think from an operational perspective as well, I think you will have these great, fantastic institutional products and operators but you're also going to have cowboys, and you're also going to have people that are promising the world and then under-deliver. So that, again, that's something that we've got to manage, because when we go back to speaking to Wandsworth, probably like 8 years ago, the biggest concern was the ghettos of the future. And we as an industry need to make sure that we're flying the flag of how it's done properly, and then hopefully preventing those type of solutions arising. And I think the third thing that I expect to change is in relation to the OpCo and the operational format. I think you're going to see a lot of third-party operators grow exponentially, which has pros and cons. But I also think you're going to really see the emergence of internal opcos, where they're controlling all of the IP, they're creating a really strong product and a really strong brand, similar to the way you would have Soho House or Hoxton. And I think that only really comes by actually internalizing everything. And I think, interestingly, that's probably where the institutional capital is going to be more interested in that, because they want to be able to differentiate themselves with what they've got. So I think pros and cons, but I think most of the thing it's a good thing. And also there probably comes a point where we stop calling it co-living, because if every building's called co-living, it kind of takes away from the joy of it, and it just becomes another saturated product in the marketplace.
Yeah, thanks, Jermaine. Some really good points there. Brent, finally to you, your predictions, and then we'll just quickly go to a question or two from the audience.
So I think if I was talking my crystal ball, it would probably tell me something like this. So I think in terms of a product, as we all, I think, have reached consensus on here, that the core co-living product will continue to diversify and broaden its appeal. It will become a broader church in terms of its membership and resident base, and the product will move in line to facilitate that. However, I'm also quite intrigued and interested by, and these schemes are starting to open up now and are starting to hit the market. I'm also quite intrigued by this approach we're seeing, where operators and investors are launching buildings and trying to create a very intentional, like-minded community of people around, not necessarily how old people are. And in a lot of ways, people's age is probably one of the least interesting dimensions of their human being, right? So, but it's more about lifestyle preferences. So is it wellness? Is it health? Is it creativity in the arts? I don't know. It could be a whole myriad of things. But I think that's very interesting. And these markets are, these schemes are in the market now. And I think what will be again interesting about those schemes is when a building takes that approach, how does that extend lease lengths, and what does that do to the income profile? So I would say, really exciting time for co-living more broadly, and yeah, there are challenges, clearly political and planning risk, but I think it's a great juncture to be involved at co-living at the moment.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Brent. Penny, I think that might have been your alarm. I know you need to go, so thanks for your contributions today. Hopefully the guys can just stop on for a couple of minutes and just answer these last questions. But thank you very much, Penny, for your contributions.
Thank you very much.
We have a second question here from Kate, which is about room sizes and typologies. Are you typically including private kitchenettes in these 21 to 30 square meter units, or are the kitchens communal? Jermaine, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so all our rooms provide kitchenettes. I think it's quite important, because ultimately we all have different moods at different times, and sometimes you want to meet people and cook with people, and sometimes you just don't want to see the world, or you want to switch off. So yeah, all our rooms have kitchenettes. I don't think any institutional scale co-living schemes actually don't have kitchenettes, in truth, and then they're then supplemented by the communal as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jermaine. And finally, Brent, I'll address this one to you because you touched on it in your last answer. From Gonzalo Hall, are you surfing the wellness and longevity trend? Pools can be great cold plunges during the winter, saunas, etc.
Sorry, George, what was the question?
Are you surfing the wellness and longevity trend? Cold plunge pools during the winter, saunas, etc.
Personally, I'm not, although I am partial to an avocado. I think as I mentioned, I think more of these schemes will come into the market. I think it's inevitable, and let's just be clear. Let's just be clear what drives that. That's trends, and that's people's lifestyles, right? This is wellness and health is a booming area of the broader, particularly Western economy. right? So it's a logical jump that in some way, shape, or form would seep into, you know, the residential space, which it's now doing. I think Gonzalo, you know, raised an interesting point around, okay, so what does that mean though from an amenity perspective? And you know, the world's probably an investor and a developer's oyster on that.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. Thanks, guys. That was a really interesting session. I'm just going to run through a couple of quick slides before we wrap up, and we will leave the session open for a couple of minutes if you want to take any notes from the chat. So the next Urban Living webinar is on Friday, May the 9th, and it's about operational net zero in the institutional rental sector. The link to register for that webinar is in the chat. Just a quick heads up about our flagship event, the Urban Living Festival, which is taking place on September the 22nd and 23rd at Mary Ward House in London. This is a really great event where we have dedicated content to several different living and hospitality sector asset classes. Lots of variation in the formats, some real good interactive stuff. And I'm currently starting to put together the speaker list now, and we've got some great people coming along. So hope to see lots of you there. Again, the link, if you want to find out more about that, is in the chat. If you're interested in working with us at Urban Living News or any of our other brands, in fact, on our real life or digital offers, get in touch with my colleague Piers, whose details are on the screen there, are also in the chat. And finally, thanks for watching. Thanks to Brent, to Oliver, to Jermaine, and to Penny for their great insights today. If you're on any of the social channels, you can see on the page there, then give us a follow. We're quite active on those. Thanks to ARL and Co-Living Ventures for supporting this session. Have a great rest of your day and have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Hello, we are International Hospitality Media, or IHM for short. IHM is the #1 brand to engage with decision makers in hospitality and real estate. Our 4 multimedia brands lead their respective sectors with breaking news, comments, trends, and opinions across a variety of multimedia solutions. We provide an inspirational community to connect people through world-class events, webinars, podcasts, award schemes, and much more. But let us share our story of who we are and what we do. Over 10 years ago, Piers and George had a light bulb moment to provide expert opinion, comments, and low-cost digital content. And so, they went on a journey over the past decade, creating media platforms to serve the hospitality and real estate industries. We now have an engaged audience with a reach of over 60,000 monthly visitors across our website, 52,500 in our email database across all sectors, and over 68,000 across our social channels. Everything we do challenges the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. We make things simple and very easy to work with us, and we're a friendly bunch too. We offer creative solutions to help you achieve your business goals. Read, watch, listen, and meet with IHM. Connect with us for a chat today. Just look at some of the brands we have worked with recently.